Ein Wille Bracha for life and for blessings. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Shabbos. The world, we perceive it in a manner of cause and effect. Meaning, we got a lot of snow over here, and driving has been a little crazy. So you're driving a little more carefully, you know, where you might have gone, uh, 50 kilometers. Now maybe you're going 25 kilometers an hour. If you if you rammed, God forbid, your car. I remember, I can picture it. It's a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, on a snowy, icy, and it was icy. And I'm at the light, and I see that a car is coming down the hill sliding. It was going pretty fast, and it couldn't stop, and knocked into me. Thank God, in the end, it was going a little slower. But imagine if it wasn't, if it was going full speed ahead, 50 rather than 25 or whatever, right? So the cause would have a greater, in this instance, negative effect, right? It would have a greater negative effect. And that's very um, obvious to us. And everything in life is that way. We know that in simple relationships. I'm going to say this thing that is maybe a little nasty to my good friend, and they're not going to appreciate it. It's going to have a negative effect. If I really come down hard, ooh, will it have a huge negative effect in our relationship? If I say it only mildly, so maybe there'll be minimal effect, negative effect, but maybe it'll be more positive than negative, right? That's all called cause and effect, right? Simply, if I brush my hand quickly and it's full cup of water or coffee, and quickly it's going to spill. If I go gently, it won't spill. Cause and effect, right? We are so by our minds, and the mind is all about consequence, which means, right? And therefore, we're always weighing pros and cons with our rational mind, which is all good, which is all the way it's supposed to be, right? Um, but we're limited in that way, and that's how we perceive things. So therefore, we see, if I will act this way, oh, this is what the punishment will be. So what brings me not to do the thing is the punishment. Hmm, that's why I'm not doing it? It's because of the punishment? Whether the punishment is the guilt I'll feel, which is punishment for your, yeah, in of yourself, or because of the person, what they will, maybe, like, not talk to you, let's say. Whatever it is, it's all based on the consequence. It's not based on what is. So what is? What is that if you say something to a loved one, you know, that maybe, you feel a little hurt and they triggered you, and you kind of give it to them over the head. You know what that is? Disconnect. What will be the consequence? Well, the consequence will be what the consequence is. But before you look at a consequence, what is? It's a disconnect. Oh, maybe if you had your sensibilities about you, right, and you wouldn't let that foolishness or that trigger you, you, because it's a loved one, you don't want to be disconnected from them. So what you will try to do is connect rather than be disconnected. So point being is we need to train ourselves in how to see things for what it is, not for what the consequence is, not for what the outcome will be, but what is this in fact? Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad, Zurich, Kadesh, Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We conclude today chapter 24. And here in chapter 24, we are explaining how when we do something sinful, and something sinful is because God said it's sinful, whether it's between you and God or between you and man, between you and a man or woman, between you and another, right? Human. It's also between you and God. We just finished learning 10 Commandments, right? First tablet is between you and God. Second tablet is between you and man. And it's all God's command, right? So when we do something sinful, whether it's huge or whether it's small, what is it? It's a disconnect, period. Yeah, but it wasn't such a big deal. Doesn't matter. In that moment, there's a disconnect, equally big or small. The spirit of folly enters us because we're full of ourselves, so we allow folly to enter to say, well, there is a distinction. Come on. This ain't so bad versus that. And not to say there's not a truth to that, but that's just a justification. That's a rationalization. That the consequence is not so great in me, thinking a negative thought, not even speaking it, or me just speaking a negative something, harsh because I was triggered, but I didn't act upon it, and hit the person or whatever. So yes, the consequences are less in thought, more in speech, and even more in action vis-a-vis the other person, at least, right? That's true, but that's the consequence. But the disconnect between you and God is period. It's the same. Disconnect. So the fool thinks that they're, oh, when it comes to idolatry, oh, that's a real disconnect. But, now in this discussion, so we see in the Torah that there's there's nuances and things, and therefore we, you know, so for example, we see that to save a life, sometimes we override a prohibition, like Shabbos. God forbid someone is in a, is in in a situation that their health is compromised, and it's not a cold, right? Not because you have a cold or influenza and you gotta maybe just stay in bed, but something more serious, and you need a doctor or you need to go to the hospital. Guess what? You break Shabbos. You don't do that for idolatry. So the person might think, oh, idolatry, that's. But Shabbos, look, I can break Shabbos. So the truth is, no, it's not that way. It's not because Shabbos is less, right? In the consequence, you're discussing even the consequence, right? It's less because you could break it on certain circumstances where there is a question of life saving, so saving a life. But when it comes to idolatry, you don't transgress to save a life. It's one of the three things that you actually give up your life. Something that we spoke about in chapters 18 and 19, that the Jews throughout centuries who didn't live for God yet martyred, gave up their lives instead of accepting another faith. So yeah, maybe because the transgression is much worse. So the Alter Rebbe explains, no. The reason we do that there's a leniency in Shabbos, that if someone's life is at risk, that you desecrate the Shabbos, is for the sake of Shabbos, because this way you'll keep many more Shabboses rather than giving up your life right now. So it's almost like Shabbos is saying, desecrate in order that you'll keep me. And in the end, it's what we call a Gzeirus HaKosuv. It is a decree of the Torah. The decree of the Torah is telling us that when it comes to something life-saving, Shabbos, you desecrate. When it comes to idolatry, adultery, and murder, you don't desecrate. Why? Because that's what God said. So in other words, don't make the consequence the way it is in law, sort of to prove, that this is more important and this is less important, right? The fact is, yes, the consequence of transgression, and we do see that there's different types of punishments, whether it's death penalty, whether it's early death at the hands of heaven, all of that, the punishment is only to bring healing. Sometimes the only healing you can bring to a person is through death, because that's how you cleanse their soul. But the whole idea of it, in any case, is for cleansing. So the disconnect, though, is the same. The dirt that you may have might be different. And therefore, someone might be dirtier and therefore need more cleaning than someone who's less dirty and needs less cleaning. But in the fact that you're dirty, it's equal. It's equal. And that's where we have to try to reframe our minds, because we live in a world that everything is a consequence. We own our minds, and that's the way the mind works, is just sees pros and cons based on consequence rather than what is. What is, whether you're really dirty or somewhat dirty, you're dirty and you need cleaning. Whether you did a big sin or a small sin, there's no difference in the fact that in the moment you're disconnected from God. There's no difference. Is that clear? Yeah? It's our animal soul that wants to delude us to think that there's a distinction. In the dirt, there's a distinction. How much dirt has to be cleansed afterwards? Fine. We're not talking about afterwards. That's not what is. That's what will be, what needs to be done, let us say. But the inherent essential fact is what is disconnect through sin, period. Now, here's the Elder says something fascinating. The Jew, in their sin, what happens in the moment of sin? You're disconnected, we just said, right? But are you like in other faiths, when you disconnect, what happens? That's it, it's finished. It's over. Right? You're going to hell. And you're going to burn in hell forever. Right? That's other faiths, not here. Even when you sinned, when the Jews sinned, the soul, the Ava Mesiteris, the love of God, which now seems to be a love of paganism, idolatry, or whatever, right? Or the love of of self, whatever it is, the love of God is still there. And it was completely in faith with God at all times, that love of God in your soul. Except it's in exile, it's imprisoned, and can't express itself. We'll have this metaphor later on that, like the king's son who's in prison. King's son that's in prison, is he still the son of the king? Of course he is. He didn't lose that. He just can't act like the son of the king because he's in prison. So likewise, the divine soul that is totally bound up with God in this moment, is it still the godly Jewish soul that's bound up with God? Absolutely. It didn't lose that at all. It didn't lose that faith, that desire to connect. Absolutely, it's there. Except it can't exercise its function in the person because it's in exile. Because that's what sin does, disconnects you in the moment. And to make this a little more graphic, what is it the sin metaphorically like? You take the head of the king, which is like your soul that's in your head, right, in your brain, and you take the head of the king and you put him into a toilet bowl, in the place of filth. Okay, you pick up the head right afterwards. Oh, but in that moment, what did you do? In sin, that's what's happening. That's a real disconnect. And meaning you're taking your soul and your head, right? The head of your king, which is a head of coming from God, right? That king above. And you're taking that which is there. It's still the king. It's still your soul, but now it's in a place of filth. Meaning it, well, can't exercise its function in that moment. It can't exercise its function at that moment. Now, the next moment you can do tshuva, and the next moment you could do a mitzvah. But in that moment of doing what's wrong, that's what is happening. That's what is, rather than what the consequence of it is, which is very important. Oh, I forgot to put on. Any questions? Any comments? Yes, Douglas. Yeah. Sometimes we need something graphic that helps us. wanting to not disconnect. And not about having guilt. It's about, having this real. Okay, I don't see questions. All right, amazing. We will continue, God willing. Rambam is coming up now. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine. Come to you.